Hi everyone. In April, I got a viewer request to read a time travel story since my channel name references time travel. I was happy to oblige. I picked out a novel called The Time Traders by Andre Norton, not realizing it was the first in a 7-book series. Since the first 4 are included in the Audible Plus catalog, I ended up gobbling them down quickly. I'd like to review them here. I'll try to avoid spoilers when I can, but for the later books, there will be a few, especially for the last book. For the first book, The Time Traders, was copyrighted in 1958. It assumes that the Cold War is still raging sometime in the 21st century. Somehow, the Russians and Americans have both acquired the ability to time travel into the past. America is selecting criminals and other misfits who have the capacity to survive in the past and training them for time travel missions. The Time Traders follows one such criminal, Ross Murdoch, on his adventure. At first, it's not clear to Murdoch just what kind of program he's been selected for, what his mission is, or why it's needed. He's rather resistant to authority of any kind, and especially to some unknown mission. More is revealed to him and readers as the book progresses and Murdoch begins to accept his situation. To say more would probably stray into spoiler territory. Potential readers should be aware that since these novels were written in the 50s and 60s, there are elements of language and other features which are of their time. The first book calls Asian Americans Orientals. The grammar that primitive peoples use in the first book is stereotypical caveman grammar. The technology described is sometimes a little funny, like keeping records on tapes in an impossibly technologically advanced situation. There's only a single female in the first book, whose role is brief, and the intended reader seems to be male, which is interesting considering that the author is a woman. I looked up the author, and she added Andre to her name as an adult to make herself sound like a male author, because back then, science fiction and fantasy were considered male genres. Her birth name is Alice. As the series progresses, more space is given to female characters. If you can look past the elements which are of their time, the story draws you in. The writing keeps the reader engaged and tightly weaves the story together. Everything introduced is wrapped up while allowing the story to continue at a fast pace. The characters are pretty well defined and easy to keep separated in the mind. For someone who doesn't see movie sets in their mind when reading descriptions, it was easy to get a sense of what the surroundings looked like without getting bogged down in long descriptions. The characters themselves were not always thoroughly described, but that didn't bother me too much. The second book, The Galactic Derelict, follows a new character, Travis Fox, an Apache man, but still has the old characters. Fox is a skilled follower of the old ways of his people and finds the time travelers preparing for a mission before being recruited by them because he'd accidentally found their camp. This story features interesting discussions of race from a white man's perspective and the white author's perspective through the Apache character's head that were trying to be progressive for the time. The man in charge tells Fox that he is welcome on the mission because he is skilled, regardless of his skin color. On the other hand, there are descriptions of people as red man and white men dressing up as makeup as indigenous people for the mission instead of the project finding actual indigenous people to complete the mission or contacting indigenous nations for guidance on how to complete the project with respect, which I think fits the definition of brownface. This is despite the project claiming to find people suited to particular missions. Fox didn't expect any better from white men, but was simply glad not to be killed by them and to be included in the mission, which says a lot. The third book, The Defiant Agents, follows Travis Fox yet again. The white men of the project decide that indigenous people are more likely to survive on another planet long term than white people because they lived in the wilderness for thousands of years before white people conquered them. Therefore, they select a group of Apaches to settle on a new planet without telling them that on the way they will be in machines that will mind control them into false memories of being their ancestors. When the Apaches arrive and figure this out, and find that they will likely not be resupplied, they rightly feel betrayed. The rest of the story revolves around how the Apaches deal with that betrayal and their new reality. I'm no expert on Apache culture, so I'm not sure how much research the author did on them, but the author portrays them with sympathy and is definitely making a point on how white people treat indigenous people. There is a strong woman character in the story. Perhaps the author became more comfortable with adding a woman by the third book. Key Out of Time is the fourth book and was published in 1963. It follows Ross Murdoch again. This one is kind of interesting. It features 4 women and a disabled man. This time, a group of Polynesians have been recruited to settle a planet compared to Hawaii. Ross and 2 other people are pulled through a time transfer into the planet's past, where they enter into the political situation of the planet. The representation in this book is kind of interesting. The Polynesian representation doesn't play a central role like it does with the Apache representation in the third book. This episode has more women than any other so far. One Polynesian woman is inexperienced in some aspects of the mission, but experienced in others. When Ross treats her with disrespect, she corrects him, and he accepts that. Ross and Ash, another time agent, also accepts leadership from 3 women from the planet, but only when they have powers that are needed when the man's brawn is not adequate to the task at hand. The discussion of disability suggests that disability can be more than just physical or mental. The physically disabled man is called crippled, which is probably the term used at the time. He is able to voice the discrimination he faces within his society and to display his agency and strengths. He becomes a valued member of a team. He and another character have the ability to communicate telepathically with both humans and dolphins. This is shown within the story to be a strength in some situations and a weakness, almost a disability, in others. In this context, telepathy is a stand-in for empathy. Too much or too little can be a problem depending on the situation. I'm not versed in disability rights discourse, so I'm not quite sure what to make of this take, but I liked that there was at least an attempt in 1963 to treat a disabled man with some sense of dignity. Overall, I think if you're looking for an older science fiction / fantasy series, this one is worth reading. It's a fun way to get a sense of the ideas being discussed 60 years ago. I hope you have a good week. Happy reading!